Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the No Name Cinema Society. It is Thursday, July 19th, 2018, and it is time for our classic movie discussion. Tonight's film is called Pump Up the Volume from 1990, and we have a good, clean bandwidth here tonight, so the price is right to talk about this particular film. Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here this evening. And, guys, I have had a hell of a day. I worked today on set, raced back in time to try and watch the movie in time, but the Netflix wasn't here. And finally, just as I was ready to give up, the mailman came in time for me to pump up the volume. So I watched it just in time. But of course, with all the rushing around and the craziness and the weather, I am super sick. I am dying here in Astoria, New York. So you have to bear with me if I sniffle and sneeze a lot. Case in point. So let's introduce my much healthier co-hosts. Let's start with the corrupt high school principal, Drunk Davey.
You know, you sound all right, man. Maybe you should get sick for more of these.
You like the bassiness of my voice when I do this?
I do. Not so much the snot sound, but definitely the tone.
Well, you're just gonna have to live with the snot sound. They come hand in hand, apparently. And so my other co-host tonight is the rebellious loner with a pirate radio station who'll be on the next 2 consecutive shows with us. Young Ryan Turner is back with us.
What's up?
So Ryan, the question I have for you is, do you wear a cock ring?
Oh man, getting right into it. No, not currently wearing one, JB.
Oh, good. I'm glad we can start the show off in that way. Ryan, are you drinking with me tonight?
Eventually.
I am going to open a bottle here. I've got Two Hearted Ale, which I first discovered while working with you, Ryan, on a shoot date in 2025, I recall.
That's right.
I haven't seen it in New York yet, and so I bought it since it's now in New York, and I'm enjoying it. All right, so let's talk about our schedule of our 49th series of episodes. We started on July 11th with the Marvel film Ant-Man and the Wasp. On July 16th, we did the indie spotlight of the French film Blue is the Warmest Color. Tonight, of course, July 19th, we're doing the classic Pump Up the Volume from 1990. And on July 23rd, Ryan will be back for our 33rd Sound Off, our freeform segment. And we're going to do some fun things. The movie game's going to come back. We're going to do an obscure movie discovery. Davey has assigned me to count down the top 5 angry youth films, which I had some trouble with, but I'll get to that on Monday night. The trivia for this particular episode is, in the last episode, I said we get to revisit a film from 1990 that didn't get mentioned at all in our famous 1990 in review show that we did a couple years ago. But I should have mentioned it on the top 5 I did in episode 43.4. And Davey, do you remember what the top 5 I did in episode 43.4 was?
No.
It was my top 5 counterculture films. I didn't think of this film when considering it as one of the best counterculture films ever made because I was so focused on the 60s and 70s when thinking of counterculture, not stopping to consider those from a different time period, including the late 80s and early 90s. I think this very firmly can be considered a counterculture movie. The other fun little tidbit that I haven't told you guys before about this movie is growing up, I was not allowed, my parents did not allow me to watch rated R movies. I officially wasn't allowed until I went to college. However, I had a friend down the street that was a little older, and she rented this movie and asked me to come down. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first rated R movie I ever saw.
Whoa.
That's kind of an exciting thing for this movie. So it's summary time. You guys ready for the summary?
Yeah.
Yep.
They're just waiting until they get to talk. They're excited about when I'm done with all this nonsense. Pump up the volume. Mark is a teenage loner in a new town and a new school who creates an anonymous pirate radio station as a means to vent his frustrations. As his show gains in popularity, he ruffles more than a few feathers, not only with the FCC, the townspeople, but also the high school officials whom he publicly calls out on a number of shady decisions. As pressure mounts and everyone tries to discover the true identity of Hard Harry, Mark must decide whether or not to take the risk of keeping the show going or allowing his followers to continue feeling alienated and disenfranchised. Guys, how was that summary?
It's good.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Solid.
Cool. It's time for opening thoughts. So now these guys will get to talk. So I will let Ryan's a veteran now, although we haven't seen him since the Top 10 show. Ryan, it's time. What are your opening thoughts? A sentence or two.
Thought it was an interesting look back at that time period of not only our country, but the culture of, high school and things back then.
Are Are you suggesting your high school was not like this?
Yeah. No, my high school experience, well, I was in the suburbs, so I definitely empathize with that, but a lot more like leather, I would say. My high school experience.
Okay, well, this might align more with Davey and I's high school experiences. Davey, what's your opening thought?
This is even before our high school years, man. This is this
Speak for yourself.
This goes back a bit.
Yeah. What do you think of the movie?
I was surprisingly not too bad.
So where does that fit in the Davey scale? I'd like to know.
Oh God, yeah, good movie, I guess.
Okay, there you go. I screened this film. Actually, we had a group outing to the Alamo Draft House on January 17th, 2017. And I actually did a vlog live from the Alamo Draft House. Everyone that went to the screening really enjoyed it. As far as my opening thoughts are concerned, I would actually say it's one of the most underappreciated films of the last 30 years. Every time I watch it, I get something more out of it. And so we'll jump right into it. And the thing I want to highlight first is the direction. I think the tone that Alan Moyle sets is outstanding. Like, he really captures the spirit of generation, as good, if not better, than any film of its era. Now, teen angst is overdone to be sure, but in this movie, I think it's palpable, visceral, and thus supremely impactful. Davey?
It reminds me of The Last Picture Show, which is a movie we covered.
How so?
Similar tone, and I think the ups and downs, it kind of does remind you of youth, where you can be so happy one minute and then just feel like depression. Like, it doesn't usually get as bad as that, as you get older. It's usually the ups and downs when you're that age. I think it captures that tone pretty well.
Yeah, and it's not just the hormones, but also you're learning how to deal with these emotions. They're new, each time. That growing process is really intense. It sounds like it captured that in a realistic way to you. It's what it sounds like to me.
When it tried, I think sometimes it gets a little campy, but that's all intentional.
Let's put a pin in that, because I'm sort of curious about the campy part. So we'll come back to that. But I want to hear what Ryan has to say about the tone.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it felt very dated, but like I said, is a window into that time.
What do you mean by dated? Because it was a movie about the time. It was a movie from 1990 about 1990.
Yeah, it just felt like there was a lot of caricatures. The characters, in a lot of ways, to me, felt like caricatures, more so than a modern film might have. There's like the bully, the jock, and this, and like...
Who was the bully and the jock?
Well, there was the guy getting expelled, and then there was like the two guys with the Letterman jackets.
They didn't behave like bullies and jocks. The kid that was expelled was like a bit of an outcast, and he was a fan of the show.
I guess I'm not saying there weren't people that actually liked that. I'm just saying the majority of the characters felt somewhat caricaturous and felt very somewhat broad all across the board. It was still very interesting. I mean, I really thought a lot of the performances were... That being said, a lot of the performances were very interesting. Christian Slater had a really interesting introverted kind of like take. It was cool to see him kind of play that dichotomy of the guy that's more willing to talk to a random group of people in the ether than he is to talk one-on-one with somebody. The suicide call was actually a really powerful moment too.
Sure. Really I had a hard time sitting through that one, like in a positive way. Like, it was effective. I have more on Christian Slater later, so let's put a pin in that as well. But I do want to disagree strongly with the caricature concept, because I do feel like that is the opposite of what I think. And what I think is partly powerful about the movies, I think it's playing off the archetypes, because I don't think these people, they dress in a certain way. I see that point of view, but I don't think they behave in the way that you're thinking about. And I think that the movie plays off those archetypes in the sense that it shows how all these different people, like, the famous thing about The Breakfast Club is that's caricatures for me, is The Breakfast Club, the jock, the popular girl, the nerd, the dweeb. That's the tagline for The Breakfast Club. But this takes all those archetypes, and Hard Harry brings them all together. And I think that's part of what makes it powerful for me. And I think that's why it made those wardrobe choices without, making those characters two-dimensional. Like, I think it avoids the caricatures in that sense, based on their behavior. I see your point about the outfits, but I don't think they actually behaved in a way that felt like a bully or a jock. Davey, do you have a thought on this?
I think I agree with the caricature assessment, but I more for the teachers than the students.
Yeah,
I agree with that actually, and I have more on that later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were a bit over the top. I definitely think they represented people that I remembered, but not to that extent.
All the adults were somewhat two-dimensional, and I have that note in my screenplay section. But segueing now to shot choices, I actually think Alan Moyle, who doesn't direct or didn't direct or hasn't directed that many movies, I should say, is an extremely effective storyteller here. The shot choices, I think, were spot on almost always. Inserts in the beginning to establish character were really detailed. Tight close-ups on Christian Slater when he's on the air, making him as large as life as his character is to those kids. And during dialogue scenes outside the broadcast, a lot of fluid moving camera shots that I thought were really effective. Every shot that he chose seemed to move the story forward, which also is an editing thing. It's really well done. I think it's a good story, well told in that regard.
I like the way that the shot selections during the on-air periods, but also the editing. I just liked how it kind of moved around. It kind of reminded me, I shouldn't make this comparison because I don't remember it as clearly, but it kind of reminded me of like Dr. Johnny Fever and WKRP. When I was a little kid, I loved that show. So I...
Ryan's not even heard of that show.
Probably not, no.
The broadcast sequences are riveting, as they need to be. Cutting between the performer and the magic behind the curtain and then the reaction of his listeners is important because I think you feel his impact. So I think the editing is another strong element to the movie. Ryan, you are an editor. We talked about the editing a little bit. What do you think?
One of the editors, I was his assistant when I first moved here.
Wow, personal connection.
I didn't even know that until the credit popped up on screen for the opening credits. Yeah, I thought it was really effective editing.
Did he be mad that you called the characters caricatures?
I don't think that was in the editing.
Do you think he wouldn't take it personally?
No, I don't think so. It seemed like very of the time, I guess is what I'm saying. I think, and yeah, I mean, I didn't mention those, but when I was mentioning characters, I mean, the teachers and that stuff were definitely one of the main ones that I was feeling. I thought that the pacing was nice. I thought the world building, they really did a lot of cross-cutting to characters that are only established in little short pieces, you know, like the guy that sells the tapes later, and they kind of didn't heavy hand like a lot of the details. They just kind of showed this building and showed the expanse of the world and the people listening. Like, I thought it was really cool the way they cross-cut between so many people, but still made you keep a tab on them.
I felt like I knew the whole town.
Yeah, it was impressive because they had a lot of characters to establish, and I think they did a good job of that.
The screenplay, too, I thought did a good job of that, too. Performances, which I do think are somewhat uneven, but to Ryan's point, I do think Christian Slater is outstanding. I think it is the best performance of his career. Ryan mentioned this as well. The public Harry and the private Mark are two very different characters, but he makes them both feel real. They feel that it's plausible that it's the same person. I mean, the character, the words are all juicy for an actor, but he doesn't disappoint. He makes us feel the importance of those words, and that to me is the skill of the performance. Ryan, you already talked about Christian Slater a little bit. Do you have more?
You really, as an audience member, looked forward to the radio almost as much as the people did in the movie, and I felt like you looked forward to hearing what he was going to say next. I mean, obviously that's the writing, but I mean, it's him bringing those words to life in a way that feels very kind of like a runaway train. You kind of can't turn away when he starts talking. You feel just brought in by what he's doing. And I think that's a lot of testament to the actor. Not more so than the script. I think it's a combination of both, but I think he did a really good job. And you could tell a lot of it was just him being grounded and fully present in the scene.
Yeah, and that's really fully present, I think, is a really good way to describe it. And, I do think the words, though, and I don't want to jump too far ahead of the screenplay, I do think the words are very impactful to me. Like, and they feel honest. They feel like, they don't feel preachy. They feel like they're coming from a character's mouth instead of just like a director's voice. They feel like they're coming from a high schooler, an intelligent high schooler, albeit cultured high schooler. It feels very real. And Christian Slater is a big part of that. But I do think the writing, particularly in those sequences, is quite good.
No, totally.
Davey, Christian Slater.
Kind of the juxtaposition of his performance when he was in school versus when he was on the air. I think we all know people like that. Maybe we're not all like that to that extent, but we all have our moments where we clam up a bit versus when we're on and with our friends.
Like, in fairness, you're a different person in person. You have a different name in person.
You're right. I'm not usually this reserved.
He talks in usually multiple syllables outside of the show. That's kind of exciting. Do you agree Christian Slater, best performance of his career? Is that too bold of a statement?
I mean, the only thing I've seen him in recently is Mr. Robot, and he's pretty good there also.
Pretty good. I mean, but this is a leading performance, so maybe I'm giving it a little more weight as a result.
I think so. In that regard, I'll say tentatively yes, but I'm not really. I don't have a whole lot in my mind when I say that. or myself. on this show.
So I do want to acknowledge Samantha Mathis, who is lovely, good, believable. Obviously is not as rich of a role as Christian Slater, but she does a nice job with it. She never bumps or feels unreal. I don't think she necessarily has an impact the way that he does, but she definitely makes me believe the character's actions. I don't have a lot of praise for her, but I don't have any quibbles either. Ryan, anything on Samantha Mathis?
No, I thought she was great. She did the job she needed to do. Nothing really rang untrue to me.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I ran into her on an airplane once. That was kind of exciting because I'm one of the few people that I would actually recognize Samantha Mathis at this point.
You're not going to tell that story? Did you say hi?
Would I say hi to a random stranger on an airplane?
Not a random stranger. She's a very specific stranger.
It's true, and she was flying coach, which made me feel good.
You saw her walk past you while you were up there in
She was
first
sitting
class?
in the aisle across from me. So yeah, I had hours to say hi, and I did nothing.
Oh, dude, come on. You're never going to
What
get
am I
that.
gonna say? I saw you naked and pump up the volume?
I probably wouldn't open with that.
Anyway, so the one issue, the real drawback of the movie for me, performance-wise, though, is almost every other performance in the movie, aside from those two. All the supporting performance are almost all wooden. There's some exceptions, like I like the writing teacher, the blonde teacher, but the adults and some of the other kids actually just feel less trained to me, quite frankly. Like this was a 1990 version of an indie movie. Christian Slater was coming down off a pedestal to be in this movie to make it more distributable. It was not a huge quibble. I like the movie very, very much. It was enough of a drawback to keep it off of my top 10 of 1990. I do think all the other people, and it's the writing too, but I think the performances are just wooden for everyone else in this movie, aside from Slater and Mathis and the English teacher. Davey, is that what you were saying too about the teachers?
Definitely, although I think that the teachers were probably told to ham it up a bit. The one performance in it, and now that I think about it, it may just be that I really like the character, maybe not as much about the performance, was I thought his father, maybe it's just because that character kind of took a turn that I didn't see coming that I enjoyed. And it wasn't as much about the performance, but that was one that kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah, I agree with the character switch. I don't agree. I mean, I do think his performance is still weak. I feel like he doesn't feel like a real person to me. And first of all, he's also got second of all, he's got a really bad haircut, which, we should take.
That's believable. I mean, that's...
Yeah, maybe that is believable. But regardless, I agree. That's an example of where I think the writing works, but the performance doesn't to me. Because I actually do think I don't think it's hamming it up. I think he's stiff. I think he's too stiff. Brian.
To me, it's a combination of everything. Like I wouldn't necessarily blame the actors fully.
If anything, I want to blame the director because so many of the performances were weak. I mean, and maybe they were, sometimes in these movies, you're so focused on fleshing out the kids that you want to take away you want to make the adults two-dimensional to keep the emphasis on the kids. I've seen that happen before. I'm not a fan of that, and that's an issue for me because I think it would have been more impactful if especially the villains were a little more justifiable.
To me, it kind of one of the parts that rang untrue about the movie was just how fast everybody went to Crazy Town. It was 0 to 100 real fast, and I get the emphasis of a anarchist radio show, or I get that would exist. When the prissy girl, or the Harvard girl puts everything in a microwave, I'm like, okay, yeah, I could see that somewhat, but I think she went 0 to 100 real fast.
Have you never had angst? You were a teenager last week. I don't understand.
So you would think I would relate more to it. Yeah, I could understand some of it, but I just thought that a lot of those performances and things of them going crazy was 0 to 100 real fast. I
thought you were talking about the teacher's reaction was going 0 to 100. I actually think Alan Moyle did a good job of setting up the popular girl, prissy girl, as you call her, she was about to break. I felt that coming. I mean, I've seen the movie several times, I guess, but that was set up and believable in that sense. The other thing you have to remember, and I was going to get to this when we did the T word, but this is a generation without YouTube, without Twitter, without Facebook. This is a generation without those outlets for having a voice. And so I do think that builds up in a way, it is much easier to go unheard. Maybe I should say it's much easier to be heard now than it was in 1990. And I think that's a lot of what the movie's about, is being heard and listening.
The point that you just made, I pretty much hits it right on the head. I imagine Ryan would agree with that. It's kind of interesting that this movie was really kind of a foreshadow of what the outlet everyone would have. I mean, look, the outlet we have right now.
That's funny because that is exactly, those words are exactly in my notes.
That's what's so kind of neat about it. And in fact, I think that this movie ages extremely well because of it. You can tell like how ahead of its time it was.
It's enough of a cult movie for the Alamo Draft House to do a special screening of it, you know.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Absolutely.
Ryan, do you have a rebuttal?
No, I do think it's a relevant movie, and I think it's aged well. Again, I just felt like it just it jumped fast, especially, and I get that she snaps, but like I don't know, maybe it's just hard. I mean, I didn't have I had the internet, but not like we had MySpace, but the very early ages of MySpace. So it's like I get that, but I mean, also if you look at any other high school movie pre-1990, you know what I mean? They none of them had that either. But I guess this is a period.
But I mean, like if you look at any other high school movie before 1990, they also had a lot of angst, which I'll get to on Monday night when I do my top 5 angry youth films.
It just seemed a little over the top to like the vandalization and just the kind of jump to anarchy, just especially from such a school. But I get. You know, I think it goes back to the villain too, because they made the villain so caricaturist that like he had a more of a means of like a realistic means of grasping on a school, you know?
Well, the reason I feel like the vandalism works is I feel like Hard Harry is opening a window inside them. He's creating an outlet for them. He's encouraging them to release, to be heard. And so the vandalism is their expression. Harry has the radio show. They use the walls of the school. And what Hard Harry's saying is what they're feeling. So be it. Talk hard. That's what I think the vandalism is about. It's another outlet that they previously had because the teachers, the evil teachers that we've been talking about, they don't listen. They're not listening. So we will force you to listen with our graffiti.
They kind of missed an opportunity there. They could have gotten really topical with it because honestly, like this is a pretty whitewashed movie. I mean, even the Hispanic characters are those are white people. Like I was a little uneasy with that. You know, at the very least, they could have played that off as part of the nefarious plot. I mean,
you're certainly right. I mean, and it might have something to do with Arizona. Is not the most diverse, except for I guess there's a lot of Hispanic. You're right, Hispanic.
Yeah, right.
You're right about that. And you're right. I mean, but that is very 1990. Like, there's certainly a lot less pressure to
they had
be inclusive.
The black father stand up and said, "Well, I work in the inner city," and I was like, "Oh no."
Did he say that? I don't remember that. That didn't bump for me. Now, Davey, before we get to screenplay, you had used the word campy earlier, and I was going to come back to it. I'm just curious, was it the teachers that you were thinking about campy?
Yeah, absolutely. The principal and the principal's sycophant, who's
vice principal.
Those guys were just.
Well, they just represent the powers that be. You know what I mean?
They absolutely do. They're a bit over the top, but I definitely could place the names of the people in my school.
So as far as screenplay is concerned, like we already talked about the dialogue a little bit, it really seemed to capture a voice of a generation. And not that the characters were too similar. They didn't sound the same, but they shared a message. And that voice of a generation never felt didactic or heavy-handed or preachy to me. And I'm talking about Hard Harry's voice here. It felt honest and realistic and within the world, and still had a strong point. And I'm going to say something blasphemous here, and I'll turn to Davey first because he might have more experience with this. I actually think it felt more real to me than John Hughes' dialogue.
Oh, yeah. Between the kids, absolutely, because it didn't feel like 30-year-olds in high school. Yeah.
Ryan, how well do you know John Hughes?
Pretty well.
Are you mad at me for making that statement?
No, not really. I appreciate him, but I also don't think he's untouchable in terms of criticism.
Okay. For me, I do feel like Mark hems and haws too much about whether or not to end the show. Like it doesn't bump for me. Like it's realistic. Like I understand why it's happening. That pressure is intense, and like I would certainly think about it too. I mean, I'm indecisive about whether or not to end this show all the time. Regardless, in a movie setting, it was a little repetitive. That's one of my quibbles. It's a small thing.
I think it was kind of necessary. I mean, if they didn't at least do that some.
Well, they did it 3 times, and 2 times I thought it worked. The 3rd time, I'm like, all right, come on. You already ended the show, and now you're back. Then you ended the show, and now you're back.
Doesn't he end it and then like turn the mic back on like a couple seconds later. And
that's the first time. And I bought that because he's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, I bought that. I've had those moments myself, like knee-jerk reactions that I immediately regret. I have it all the time, as Davey knows.
I don't believe it. Really?
Shocking. Even Ron knows. So I bought that. But by the third time, I know the FCC is there and everything, but by that time, it's like, I maybe skipped the second time. Now that I think about it, the second time is the one that really doesn't work as much because the FCC, like, I get. It's one in the middle, I'm like, it was just graffiti that made him want to do it the second time. At that point, like, it wasn't news, I mean, he was already knew that he was having an impact at that point. So
yeah, first time made sense for me. It definitely stood out to me too when you said that. I was like, oh yeah, I agree with that. You're like, wait, wasn't this kind of what your belief is? And then, you know what I mean? Like, I think once real stakes come in, then it makes sense, like the FCC. But it's like people are doing exactly what you've been telling them to do.
He's a secret identity at this point, and so what he was afraid of more than anything is being unmasked, because that is where it was real danger, and that's when the real Mark, almost more afraid of being discovered as being Mark Hunter than he was about going to jail.
The law enforcement people, were they actually the FCC? Because
there was the cops and the FCC were there, yeah.
Because the FCC is like an administrative agency. It doesn't have like an enforcement arm.
No, but they didn't. There was the cops and the FCC had the triangulation equipment.
Did they have like the FBI there or something? Like it just seemed a little.
I bought that in the sense is I didn't think the FCC would had the cop cars. The FCC had.
Did they have like windbreakers and stuff like?
No, the FCC had like the vans to do the triangulation.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
All right. I mean, like we sort of touched on this. I do feel like it covers the gamut in terms of teen issues in a way that felt natural and not forced, and it wasn't condescending as films tend to be. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I think it gave a nice voice to the youth. Like it didn't feel. Yeah, I mean, you touched on a little earlier. Didn't feel like 30-year-olds. It felt organic to that generation.
Yeah. So the buzzer just went off, which means it's time for the T word, where we talk about themes of the movie. Because Davey hates doing it. He hates trying to understand what these movies are trying to say. He'd rather just watch them and go to sleep. But I think this movie has a lot of depth. And ultimately, I feel like it's almost a call to arms. It's a demand to be heard. Talk hard, the movie says. And this is where I have the note. I do think it's a foreshadowing to the YouTube culture. Kids using technology to be heard. This show, in and of itself, this is an outlet for us, this No Name Cinema Society. We may not be affecting social change, but I personally feel if we do get one person to watch a movie they wouldn't have otherwise watched, particularly a classic or an indie, then this show is a success in my book.
Well, yeah, and that's about what we've gotten.
One person. No, but I mean, so Ryan, do you feel this call to arms about being heard and listening to the youth? Like that to me is what the movie's about.
Yeah, I mean, and it even comes into the town hall when she just wants to speak and everyone's kind of speaking over her. And then there's some people saying, let her speak. That's the theme right there. It's just about giving this voice and there is a voice. And I think it's kind of like the suppression leads to this kind of boiling pot or this tea kettle that eventually gets too big.
And a tea kettle where somebody blows up their shit in a microwave?
Yeah. Yeah, and fires blue steam things everywhere. So tea kettle metaphor was really heavy-handed in this movie.
What was the theme again? I missed it. The tea kettle? No,
tea kettle is a theme. Yes.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think
it's a metaphor for the theme.
Well, I think I used the term of the fuse.
The theme that I mentioned was being heard, is listening to the youth and not suppressing them. Ryan's sort of suppressing, and I think that's a good addition to my sentence. Listening to the youth and not suppressing their voice.
It's a good metaphor because you had these kids that not only were they were upset and they weren't being heard. It was more.
Agreed.
It was more than that.
And that's a good segue into my next theme, is I do think it's a condemnation of the educational system in the sense that the concept of rankings of schools and evaluating them based on numbers and grades, that's the kind of system that leaves people between the cracks. And I think this movie points that out in a very hard-hitting way. And it also can lead to the kind of corruption and bureaucracy that we see in the film. That hasn't changed much. I do think we need to rethink the way we think about the educational system right now. Guys, what do you guys think about that, Davey?
I think there certainly is problems. I mean, we're not identifying the kids that have mental issues and getting them the help that they need. Clearly, that's manifesting itself all over the place, unfortunately.
And combine that in a society that's so crazy about guns, and you know, you wonder about why we have so many school shootings.
Absolutely.
You know, in a way, this movie is as relevant as ever to some degree. Ryan, what do you think about this educational rewiring?
It's relevant today because I think a lot of schools focus more on the bottom line, or these, I mean, even the Never Left Behind or No Child Left Behind. It's this bottom line and this image that these schools are upholding, but ultimately they are putting these kids like they're trying to favor the good kids and then put the other kids. I thought it was a little bit ridiculous in the film how she expelled like 15 kids or something in the first week or something.
It was 30 kids in the first month, and a kid a day, but that's something that did happen. I don't know if it was in Arizona, but it did happen. So that's the kind of scary thing that we're dealing with. So guys, did I miss any themes? Is there anything that the movie meant to you that I didn't pick up on? Because those are my themes. Was there something that movie said to you that there was something else going on there that I didn't mention? Sexual
liberation, even with him in the way that experiences with his father, and his father coming in and thinking he had the radio show, but then seeing he's with a girl and being like, oh, we'll continue then.
Having underage sex is better than having a pirate radio show. That's what we learned.
Yeah. And I assume that for the time, it was probably pretty progressive too. Even now, it's like, it seems very juvenile, like making the masturbation sounds and all these things. But again, I think we're in a period where we had internet porn and this exposure to sexual things everywhere we go. So I think there's this repression that existed. And that's kind of what I was looking at through that lens, because I was like, oh, this is pretty ridiculous. If I couldn't imagine someone today making masturbation sounds on the radio and people being like, this is awesome. They'd be like, what? Stop it.
I'll tell you what I think that's about. I think that's about breaking down barriers. I think that's him saying, look what I'm going to do on this radio show. I will, stop at nothing. So I think that's what people responded to in the movie with the masturbation stuff. I see your point about the juvenile stuff, but I think at that time, to that generation, that was saying to them that, I will not be filtered. Davey?
The analogy that I came up with, you go back and listen to Lenny Bruce.
It's not an analogy you came up with. That's in the movie.
Oh, damn it. The point is that everyone thought that was profane and over the top. Listen to it now, it's pretty tame. You kind of have to put your 1990 glasses on.
Those New Year's glasses that we have that say 1990.
Yeah, those.
All right, Davey, I don't suppose you have your own theme. You never do.
No.
Okay, so let's move on to the classic movie Showdown. Yeah. With me being sick, had a little extra vigor to it. So this is our movie bracket segment where movies go head-to-head, classic movies. And to explain it, how it all works, Davey has the rules that he's going to read to you.
So the seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Films are shown at JB-hosted screenings and need to be 15 years old or older. Voters are eligible to vote if they have seen both movies within a 12-month period. They must see both movies in JB's presence, and JB is ineligible to vote, though he can break ties.
So there you have it. That is the rules. And Ryan, you come to the screening, so you have experienced the brackets firsthand, so you have a sense of what's going on here. He's just going on. Yeah. Okay, so tonight we have, for the first time on this show, we have a new bracket, and it's a bracket for Indie Spirit Award winners. It's a bracket for the Indie Spirit Awards. Not all of them were winners necessarily. The Spirit Awards have been going on since the early 1984, I believe, was the first one. Maybe 85 actually was the first Spirit Award. So we took a bracket, 64 of some of their winningest movies and most nominated movies, and came up with a bracket there, and that's what we're going to experience for the first time. And Pump Up the Volume is a 16 seed in this bracket. So, Davey, that means it goes up against a
1 seed.
Oh, 1 seed. So let's see what the matchup here is in our first Indie Spirit Awards bracket, and it is number 1 seed Fargo from 1996, the Coen brothers, one of the biggest indie films ever, and it won several Oscars, including Best Actress and Best Original Screenplay. Between Fargo on April 15th of last year, 2017, and I had a choice because we had this matchup, and we hadn't talked about either film on the show, but I felt like Pump Up the Volume is a film that, doesn't get as talked about as much, and we did a Coen Brothers top 5, so I felt in choosing between the two, it made more sense to talk about Pump Up the Volume, show as much. So Fargo's is a big film. Has everybody, first of all, had anybody heard of Pump Up the Volume before I made you watch it for tonight?
Oh, yeah.
Had you seen it before?
I had not seen it.
Ryan?
I'd not heard about it.
And everybody's seen Fargo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Davey, between the two, Fargo and Pump Up the Volume, what do you think?
Oh, Fargo's better.
Okay, do you want to say why?
Performances across the board, great. Ultimately, the writing is superior, the script and the storyline. More of a praise of Fargo than Pump Up the Volume.
So you like Pump Up the Volume, but Fargo's just significantly better to you.
Yeah.
Ryan, what do you think?
I think Fargo is a good film, and I thought Pump Up the Volume was surprisingly good. I didn't expect it to be as enjoyable as it was, but it doesn't have a chance of being.
All right, so both guys say Fargo, and the vote, again, it happens at screenings, and Ryan wasn't at this screening, but Ryan has voted in the past at previous screenings, but he wasn't at this particular screening. So even though these guys both pick Fargo, it might not win, but it is a #1 seed for a reason. Ladies and gentlemen, I now reveal the winner of the vote that happened on April 15, 2017. And the winner is UMBC in the house. Pump Up the Volume wins in a shocker. #16 seed. It finally happened in the NCAA tournament. It's the third time it's happened in one of our brackets. And not only that, like the UMBC win over Virginia, it was unanimous. It was a clean sweep. Now, granted, a lot of people in the audience for Pump Up the Volume and Fargo were my age, so maybe it rang a little more true to them. Basically, if I had to sum up what their reasoning was, is the emotional and political content of Pump Up the Volume was more impactful than the quirky cinematicness of Fargo. Like, Fargo is an achievement from a cinematic point of view. It's quirky and interesting. It didn't make them feel anything. And what's more, I agree. I actually agreed with their assessment. I was surprised it won. It's only the third 16 seed ever to win. It's the only bracket that we've done in this Indie Spirit Awards thing, so it's the only one that's advanced to the round of 32 at this point. But Fargo has been eliminated in the Indie Spirit Awards bracket. Reactions?
I think you and your old friends are wrong.
I thought you liked Pump Up the Volume.
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's great, but it's not Fargo.
But it was a clean sweep. Like, it wasn't even close.
Yeah, I think they're wrong.
You think I'm wrong too? Because I actually agree. I would have voted for Pump Up the Volume. I didn't think it would win. I didn't think I'd have enough voters. But I mean, and I didn't vote. My vote doesn't count, as Davey said in the rules, unless there's a tie. But there was no tie.
I think that they took the counterculture thing too much to heart. You look at those two films without knowing the history behind them. Fargo is objectively different than the film.
I disagree. I mean, I think emotional engagement is worth something in movie making.
I was more emotionally engaged with Fargo.
How? Fargo doesn't even try to get you emotionally engaged. It's more
I care
like
about the characters more.
Like what character? I don't care about a single character in Fargo.
I loved William H. Macy.
You don't care about him though. Like, he's ridiculous and he's funny, and it's well played by William H. Macy. But I don't care about him. You rooted for him not to get arrested.
And Frances McDormand.
I have an issue with her performance as well. Like, I just feel like she's over the top to me. I mean, it's a choice to be over the top. Like, it fits within the world. I feel like there's a heightened sensibility in Fargo that's part of the Coen Brothers style, and that's all well and good. But for me, Pump Up the Volume is more impactful, slightly. Like, it's closer for me than it was for the people in the audience, I admit. And Fargo made my top 5 Coen Brothers, but I do have a special place in my heart for Pump Up the Volume. Dave, anything else, or you just want to be angry?
Nope, just angry.
All right. So, David, what did you think the possibility was that Pump Up the Volume was going to win?
I mean, I know that, first of all, I know you're wrong.
I don't vote.
Yeah, but if there's a tie, yeah, you don't, but I mean, my point
I will acknowledge one person that you know in the show, Nick Danger, was involved in that vote.
Oh, God. That's disappointing.
Okay, closing thoughts, Ryan.
I think Pump Up the Volume is worth a watch, but it should be lower in the priority than Fargo.
And Davey.
Yeah, that's right. If you haven't seen Fargo, go ahead and watch Pump Up the Volume. Otherwise, watch Fargo.
I don't know if I understood that sentence, but I'm not gonna question it. Our next classic is gonna be sometime in early August as we go back to 1942 as I try to make Davey watch some of the big films that we watched as part of that project last year. And it's one of the Oscar winners from the last 1942 film that Davey and I watched returns in a movie for which she was also nominated. That's your clue. And that's coming up in August, our August classic. Our next show is this Monday, July 23rd. We're going to do our 33rd Sound Off. We're going to have a return of the movie game. We're going to do an obscure movie discovery, and I'm going to count down my top 5 angry youth films based on this discussion of Pump Up the Volume. So that's it for this show, everyone. Stay hard, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.